Man can only realize himself through the knowledge and acceptance of his own unconscious. He used to think silence was weakness, that if he didn't defend himself, people would step over him, twist his words, or rewrite his story. So he filled every pause with explanations, long, exhausting justifications meant to prove he was good, that he meant well, that he didn't deserve to be misunderstood. He'd write long messages no one really read, repeat himself in conversations that always ended the same way, and walk away feeling smaller every time. The more he spoke, the emptier he felt. It wasn't his words that were being lost. It was himself. Each defense chipped away at his peace until he could no longer hear his own thoughts over the noise he created trying to be understood. That's the paradox of noise. It hides what we most need to hear. You talk to protect your truth, and in doing so, you bury it. The fear of being misread turns into a habit of over-explaining, of begging to be seen by eyes that were never meant to see you clearly. And the people who live from conflict, they sense that desperation. They feed on it. They'll twist your words until you no longer know what you meant, and then call you crazy for trying to clarify. There's a cruelty in this cycle, one that convinces you that peace only comes when everyone finally understands you. But that day never comes. Carl Jung once wrote that no one becomes conscious without pain. Maybe that's what silence really is, the pain of finally facing yourself without the world's commentary. Because when the noise stops, something inside you begins to echo. The voice you silenced for years, the one that whispered, "This isn't who you are," starts to speak again. And is uncomfortable because you realize how much of your identity was built in reaction to misunderstanding. You begin to see how often your words were used not to reveal truth, but to control perception, to keep the image others had of you from collapsing. Silence forces you to confront all the parts of you that only existed to please, to prove, to belong. It makes you watch the dust settle on conversations that never healed you, on arguments that stole your energy, on apologies that weren't yours to make. At first, that quiet feels unbearable, like standing in front of a mirror after years of avoiding your reflection. But slowly, something shifts. The air grows softer. The need to be right fades. You begin to understand that peace isn't found in being heard. It's found in no longer needing to explain. And then the strange thing happens. You start to feel the weight of your own presence. You start to sense what Jung called a self, that deeper center beyond ego and persona, where truth doesn't shout. It simply is. Silence, you realize, isn't emptiness. It's awareness. It's the sound of the soul reorganizing itself after years of noise. It's a kind of inner gravity pulling you back to your essence, to the part of you that doesn't need validation to exist. But there's a reason silence unsettles those who thrive in chaos. Because when you stop explaining, they lose their script. When you refuse to argue, their control dissolves. They can no longer use your reactions to define you. They can't provoke what no longer responds. And that terrifies them. Your calm reveals what their noise was meant to hide. Your stillness mirrors their unrest. And suddenly, the person who once seemed so dependent on their approval becomes untouchable. Silence doesn't just protect you, it exposes the truth in others. So the question remains, and it's the one that silence always asks before transformation begins. What does your silence reveal that the wrong people cannot bear to see? There's a reason silence feels ancient, because it is. Long before words existed, there was presence, breath, stillness, that quiet space between thoughts where truth has always lived. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the original language of the soul. When you enter it, something deep within begins to awaken. The unconscious starts to speak. Not in sentences, but in symbols, sensations, and sudden insights that seem to rise from nowhere. That's why silence can be so unsettling. It dismantles the illusions that noise so carefully maintains. When the mind grows still, masks begin to crack. The image you spent years performing, the persona Jung spoke of, starts to dissolve. And underneath it, something more honest, more fragile, and infinitely more powerful emerges. In Jungian psychology, the unconscious always seeks to restore balance to the conscious mind. When you're consumed by noise, endless thinking, constant talking, compulsive explaining, your psyche compensates by creating dreams, emotions, or even crises that force you to stop. Noise is evasion. Silence is return. The moment you quiet down, what's been ignored comes to the surface. It might show up as a memory you've buried, a truth you've avoided, or a sudden realization that your exhaustion isn't physical, it's spiritual. Silence then becomes a mirror. It reflects not only what's happening within you, but also what's happening around you. You begin to notice how certain people disappear when you no longer feed their need for reaction. The ones who lived off your confusion start to feel hungry. They don't know how to exist without the energy you use to spend defending yourself. These are the ones who fear your calm, because it strips them of their power. They can't manipulate what doesn't argue back. But something beautiful also happens. The people who truly see you, those who love you not for what you give, but for who you are, find peace in your silence. They don't need to fill it with noise. They sit with you in it, understanding that quiet doesn't mean distance. It means presence. Silence becomes a form of intimacy, the meeting of two souls that no longer need to perform for each other. Jung once described this balance perfectly when he said that the unconscious behaves compensatorily to the conscious. In other words, what you suppress will eventually find its voice, and often, that voice speaks most clearly in the quiet. The silence doesn't just calm you, it rearranges you. It brings into harmony what life's chaos had divided. It reconnects you to the self, that inner wholeness beyond your roles and fears. Yet the world we live in has forgotten this language. It fears silence because silence cannot be controlled, bought, or broadcast. We build entire lives around noise, endless opinions, constant updates, emotional outbursts that serve as proof that we're alive. But in reality, much of that noise is just avoidance disguised as connection. The moment you choose silence, you become a disruption to that system. You stop feeding the machine that thrives on reaction. And that's when the resistance comes. People start projecting onto you what they can't face in themselves. They'll call your calm indifference, your boundaries pride, your peace detachment. They'll misread your quiet as arrogance because it makes them confront their own inner chaos. Silence threatens those who need noise to feel significant. But silence isn't about withdrawing from life. It's about learning to hear it differently. It's about realizing that truth doesn't shout. It whispers. And when you start listening to that whisper, you begin to live from a place the world can't manipulate. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop chasing validation and start seeing through it. Still, this choice has consequences. In a world that feeds on emotional noise, calm becomes rebellion. You'll be misunderstood by those who depend on chaos to define their importance. You'll be judged by those who mistake peace for weakness. Because the moment you stop speaking the language of noise, you begin to speak your soul's language of silence. And that's when the real danger begins. The danger of being misinterpreted by those who can only survive in the sound of their own unrest. Manipulation rarely begins with loudness. It begins with understanding. Someone studies the rhythm of your words, the small tremor in your voice when you're afraid of being misunderstood. They notice how quickly you rush to explain yourself, how deeply you crave to be seen clearly. And that's where the invisible thread of control begins to tighten. They don't need to shout to dominate you. All they have to do is misunderstand you just enough to make you defend yourself. The game is subtle. It's not about what's said. It's about what's provoked. Every time you try to clarify, you hand them your power. They pull a string, you react. They distort, you correct. And in that cycle of endless justification, your peace becomes their supply. Jung once wrote, "That which we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate." Sometimes that fate shows up as people who embody everything we've yet to face within ourselves. The manipulator becomes a mirror of your unhealed need to be seen, your unconscious desire to prove your worth. They know silence is their greatest threat. Because silence doesn't fight, it reflects. It turns their projection back toward them. The manipulator feeds on energy, your reactions, your guilt, your explanations. Every time you try to fix the misunderstanding, you're unknowingly fueling the performance. But when you stop, when you breathe, say nothing and let the silence expand, something inside them begins to collapse. Their control depends on your noise. Without it, the illusion crumbles. That's why silence isn't passive, it's subversive. It removes the stage where manipulation performs. It takes away the audience that every manipulator secretly craves. You can almost see the confusion in their eyes when their script no longer works, when your calm refuses to dance to the rhythm of their chaos. They'll test you again, raising their tone, twisting your words, trying to bait you into reaction. But once you've tasted the strength of stillness, you understand. Not everything deserves your answer. In that space, projection loses power. You realize most of what people throw at you isn't about you. It's about them. The anger, the accusation, the false story, all it reveals more about their own fears and your flaws. Silence becomes a mirror where every hidden motive, every unspoken insecurity, returns to its owner. As Jung saw it, the shadow always seeks a host. When you refuse to carry it, the one who casts it must finally face it. But silence has its cost. When you stop explaining, the world starts assuming. They'll call you cold because they can't manipulate your warmth. They'll label you distant because they no longer have access to your energy. They'll say you've changed, and they'll be right. You have. You've stopped trading your peace for connection. You've stopped letting misunderstanding dictate your worth. This misunderstanding is painful at first because you still want to be seen, to be known, but slowly, the silence teaches you something sacred. That being misunderstood by the wrong people is protection, not punishment. The moment you accept that, the grip of manipulation breaks completely. You begin to see who can sit with your quiet without needing to distort it. Because the silence doesn't just expose others, it filters them. It shows you who's capable of meeting you in truth and who only stayed for performance. And maybe that's the real price of peace. Not losing people, but discovering who is only there to feed on your noise. So you must ask yourself, what if that price, being misunderstood, called distant, even judged, is the very filter that separates those who are with you from those who are only using you? The greatest temptation isn't the noise outside. It's the voice inside that whispers, say something. Don't let them think you don't care. It's that old fear of being forgotten, rejected, or misunderstood that makes you break your own silence before it ripens. You start to speak not from truth, but from fear. Fear of losing connection, of being seen as cold, of being alone. Yet every time you feel the silence out of fear, you abandon yourself. You trade the depth of your soul for the illusion of closeness. We speak to escape the emptiness, but the emptiness is sacred. It's where God whispers what the world drowns out. In silence, you begin to hear guidance that isn't filtered through other people's opinions. You begin to sense that there's a wisdom inside you that doesn't argue or explain. It simply knows. But the moment fear interrupts that silence, the signal fades. You stop listening to that still voice and start reacting to the noise again. Some people can't stand your quiet because it reveals their lack of control. Your calm exposes the chaos they carry. To them, peace looks like arrogance, and introspection feels like rejection. They'll provoke you, test you, push you, anything to make you speak, to make you return to the old pattern where your energy was theirs to play with. They crave your reaction because your reaction makes them feel powerful. And if you give in, if you break your silence just to soothe their discomfort, you fall back in the trap you worked so hard to escape. The manipulator's favorite moment is when you start explaining again. They know you'll try to sound reasonable, to prove your good heart, to avoid being the bad one. But every justification drains your spirit a little more. Every explanation moves you further from your center, that quiet, sacred point Jung described as a self, the axis around which the psyche finds balance. When you drift from that center, you become reactive. The emotions of others start to rule your internal weather. Their storms become yours. You lose the ground beneath you, and the noise seeps back in, not from outside, but from within. The inner critic awakens, whispering, "You're too quiet. You're losing them. You should have said more." That's not intuition. That's fear pretending to be logic. Jung understood this dance between silence and fear deeply. He saw that the psyche, when disconnected from its center, becomes vulnerable to possession by emotions, by archetypes, by the unconscious projections of others. The only way to stay whole, he believed, was to keep returning to the axis of soul, that still point where opposites reconcile. In his words, the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality. That's the paradox. Silence looks empty, but it's actually the space that holds everything. Break it too soon, and you step out of that sacred container. Keep it long enough, and you start to feel something larger than yourself moving through it. That's why true silence isn't lonely, it's inhabited. It's where you meet your own spirit again. The danger isn't isolation. It's losing your connection to that center by chasing approval from those who need your imbalance to stay comfortable. They will call your peace avoidance, your stillness indifference, your boundaries pride. Let them. Their noise has nothing to do with your truth. Because once you understand this, you no longer fear the quiet. You stop mistaking emptiness for absence. You realize that what feels like nothing is actually everything, a field where the soul breathes freely again. But how do you stay anchored in that center when the world around you spins in chaos? That's where Jung found a path, a way to remain whole, calm, and fully alive, even when everything outside tries to pull you apart. The path back to yourself is never loud. It doesn't arrive with clarity or applause. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, with the exhaustion of pretending. One day you realize that you're tired of the noise, not because the world got louder, but because you finally outgrew your own need to be distracted. That's when the true journey begins. The return to the self, the still point where light and shadow stop fighting and start to coexist. Jung called this process individuation, the sacred movement toward wholeness. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming complete. Silence is the doorway to this path. Not the kind of silence that hides, but the kind that listens. In the beginning, it feels disorienting. You start noticing how the voices of others, what they think, what they expect, still echo inside you. Their opinions have become part of your internal dialogue. Jung said that what remains unconscious within us will appear in the outer world as fate. The noise you attract is often a reflection of the inner noise you've avoided. Recognizing this is the first step, to see that the chaos around you mirrors a disconnection within you. Then comes integration. This is the moment when silence stops being comfortable and starts being raw. You feel everything you use to numb with distractions, loneliness, shame, grief, longing. It's tempting to escape, to run back into the comfort of noise, but individuation demands courage. Instead of fleeing from the discomfort, you sit with it. You let the silence hold you while the unhealed parts of you speak for the first time. Slowly, what once felt unbearable begins to transform into understanding. The emotions lose their charge because they've finally been acknowledged. Next comes conscious action, the practice of presence. You start to choose when to speak and when to remain silent. But this time, the silence doesn't come from fear or pride. It comes from awareness. You realize that not every truth needs to be defended. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Not every storm requires your participation. Your words become intentional, fewer but deeper. Your silence, when you offer it, carries more meaning than explanations ever could. And finally comes a legacy, something subtle but powerful. Your silence begins to teach. It radiates calm in rooms that once drained you. People start to sense a different energy in you. Steady, grounded, free. You've stopped reacting to every projection and started reflecting peace instead. You've learned that the most transformative lessons are not spoken but embodied. To reach this stage, though, you must face one of the most deceptive traps on the spiritual path, the illusion of detachment. It's easy to confuse withdrawal with wisdom, to mistake isolation for enlightenment. Many seekers fall here. They silence not out of consciousness, but out of fear, afraid of being hurt again, misunderstood again, drained again. They call it peace, but it's really avoidance wrapped in spirituality. True silence doesn't disconnect you from life. It roots you deeper in it. It's not a wall, it's a doorway. It allows the self, that divine center within, to breathe again. From this space, you no longer resist the world. You engage with it from a place of wholeness. You speak less, but when you do, your words come from alignment, not anxiety. You no longer seek to convince. You seek to connect. Silence at this level is no longer about escaping noise. It's about transforming your relationship with it. You become the calm in the storm, not because the world got quieter, but because you did. Yet, even here, the path demands vigilance. Because silence can heal, but it can also hide. It can reconnect you to your soul, or quietly detach you from life if you're not careful. So the question becomes, how do you know if your silence is healing you, or slowly pulling you away from the world you're meant to live in? Silence can be both medicine and mask. It can heal a wounded heart, or quietly suffocate it. The difference lies in the intention behind it. Some choose silence to reconnect with themselves. Others choose it to escape the discomfort of being seen. One nourishes the soul, the other starves it. Silence, like any sacred tool, reveals who you are by the way you use it. There are 3 traps waiting for anyone walking this path. The first is proud isolation. It begins subtly, disguised as self-protection. After too many betrayals, too many conversations that left you drained, you decide to stop letting people in. You call it peace, but deep down, it's fear dressed as strength. You convince yourself that no one deserves your energy, that solitude is safer than vulnerability. And for a while, it feels right, until the walls you build for protection become the same walls that keep love out. Jung warned that anything we repress eventually turns against us. The pain you silence doesn't vanish. It waits. And one day, your loneliness starts speaking louder than your peace. The second trap is spiritual inflation, the illusion that silence makes you superior. It's easy to fall into this one when the world feels chaotic. You start to see your calm as proof that you've transcended others. You judge those still caught in noise, forgetting that you were once there too. Pride sneaks in quietly, whispering that your stillness means enlightenment. But the moment you use silence to separate yourself, it ceases to be sacred. It becomes armor. Jung called this the danger of identifying with the self rather than serving it. When you mistake awareness for identity, you fall into the oldest spiritual paradox. The ego disguised as humility. And then comes the third trap, the most dangerous one, self-deception. This is when silence becomes an excuse to avoid what the noise would have forced you to face. You stop speaking not because you've transcended conflict, but because you're afraid of what truth might reveal. You meditate to escape, reflect to avoid, stay calm to suppress. You tell yourself you've found peace, but inside, unresolved emotions echo in the quiet like ghosts. This is not serenity, it's stagnation. Silence in this form isn't healing you, it's numbing you. True silence is alive. It breathes, it listens, it feels. It doesn't shut out the world. It refines your relationship with it. It doesn't numb emotion. It teaches you how to hold it without drowning. It doesn't reject humanity. It deepens compassion. You stop absorbing every frequency of chaos, not because you're detached, but because you've learned to filter what enters your inner space. The wrong energies can no longer penetrate, not because you built walls, but because your presence itself became a boundary. When you reach this stage, silence no longer isolates you. It connects you differently. You stop needing to shout to be understood, and people begin to feel your truth without words. The silence becomes a bridge between you and others, between you and the divine, between your conscious and unconscious selves. It becomes a space where understanding flows naturally, where connection is no longer forced but felt. And then something extraordinary begins to unfold. The stillness that once felt heavy starts to pulse with life. Creativity returns. Joy sneaks back in. You begin to hear whispers of guidance from within, the voice of the self, steady and clear. It speaks not in commandments, but in knowing. You realize that silence was never meant to imprison you. It was meant to prepare you. It was shaping the vessel so that something greater could be born inside it. And when that happens, the world no longer feels so loud, because the calm within you has become louder than anything outside. At some point, the silence that once felt heavy begins to breathe. You realize it was never emptiness. It was presence, the presence of something vast and sacred, something that doesn't need to speak to be understood. You start to feel it everywhere, in the rhythm of your breath, in the stillness between thoughts, in the quiet understanding that rises when you stop trying to control everything. This silence isn't loneliness. It's communion. It's where God meets the unconscious, and both meet you. You begin to see that the people who drift away aren't losses. They're revelations. They weren't pushed out by your distance. They were exposed by your peace. Your silence became a mirror too honest for those who still need noise to feel alive. The truth is, your stillness threatened what was false in them, but you no longer take that personally. You no longer beg to be seen by eyes that fear clarity. You understand that when the light of consciousness grows, some shadows must retreat. That's not rejection, it's alignment. The silence that once felt like a shield now becomes something greater, a sanctuary. It protects not by closing you off from the world, but by keeping you anchored in what's real. You start to move differently. You listen more, react less. You speak when truth asks you to, not when fear demands it. And in that restraint, a quiet kind of power awakens, steady, grounded, impossible to manipulate. You no longer explain your light to those who are still learning to see. You no longer trade your calm for temporary understanding. The world will keep testing your peace, throwing noise at your stillness, demanding you defend what no longer needs defense. But you've learned that real strength isn't loud, it's unwavering. The calm that once seemed like weakness is now the proof of your transformation. The emptiness that once terrified you now feels sacred, full, expansive, alive. You begin to sense what Jung meant when he described the self as the center and totality of who we are, the union of opposites within us. Your silence becomes a space where those opposites meet and reconcile. It's where the divine whispers and the human finally listens. You see now that peace was never about isolation. It was about integration. You stopped fighting the noise by resisting it. You transcended it by no longer resonating with it. And that's the secret the world never tells you. When you align with what's true, chaos can't control you anymore. You've stepped out of the storm not because it ended, but because you became the eye of it. In the sacred stillness, everything that once felt broken begins to align. The heart softens, the mind clears, the soul remembers. You've come home, not to a place, but to a state of being. Silence doesn't isolate you. It aligns you with what's true. Comment below, I choose the silence that protects me.